Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all for tuning into the first ever episode of 50 States, 50 Murders. I am your host, AJ.
I'm your co-host, Dakota.
Each and every week we will be traveling state by state, taking you, the listener, on an auditory road trip across America. We'll be discussing fun facts and interesting stats about the state we're in, and while we're there, we're going to be discussing a murder case that happened to take place in that specific state. Dakota, could you please let the listeners at home know where we will be traveling to for episode 1?
We're going to begin this journey right here in our home state of Ohio, and this week we're going to be discussing the case of Hannah Hill, a murder that took place right here in Akron, Ohio.
Again, welcome to episode 1. I really wanted to take a quick second to just thank all of the listeners out there for tuning in for this first episode. This is something that me and Dakota have been working on for, I'd say, months at this point. We've been working on this for quite some time, and we were finally able to put some things together. We're really looking forward to this project, and we hope that you enjoy it as much as we do. Again, as mentioned, we're going to kick things off here in our home state of Ohio, and it's known as the Buckeye State. We are the 17th oldest state. It actually just celebrated its 220th birthday. It became a state March 1st of 1803. Something I thought was really interesting, we are 35th among all states in size. I really thought we were a bigger state than 35. We are 7th among states in population. Does that surprise you? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
35th among all states for violent crime. And unfortunately, we are 36th for income rank. I'd really love to see that number bumped up. As far as our biggest cities, what's some of our biggest cities here in Ohio?
We got Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo, and our home city of Akron.
All right. And take us through some of the attractions that you can find here. I know one of these you actually spent some of your time working for, correct?
Yeah, I did an internship over at the Professional Football Hall of Fame. I've never been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that's pretty big attraction here. We got Cedar Point, the Cauca Valley National Park, Hocking Hills.
Yeah, interesting fact. I've actually never been to the NFL Hall of Fame. Went to an introduction, but I've never been inside.
That's a damn shame.
I've never been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow, that's actually surprising.
And I've actually never been to Cedar Point.
Okay, well, everyone loves Cedar Point. I've been there one time, and it was horrible.
Yeah, I'm just not a fan of staying in line, so...
That was about 10 hours of the 12 hours I was there.
Yeah, here in Ohio, it's not as notable, but growing up, we had Jogga Lake Six Flags, and that's where we always went. It's a lot closer, less populated. So there's that. Famous people born in Ohio. We've had some notable names here of the likes of Neil Armstrong, first man to walk on the moon. Pretty cool. LeBron James and Steph Curry, both born here in Akron, Ohio. Steven Spielberg, I feel like he has a couple decent movies under his belt. Guy Fieri, do you like Guy Fieri?
Nah, not really a fan.
Nah, you don't like his vibes?
Nah.
Okay. We got Jack Nicklaus, and a name you might have heard, Thomas Edison. He did a few cool things in his life. But
yeah, he's inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. We also have some famous murderers from Ohio. We actually have 9 serial killers that have 10 or more victims.
Oh.
I wanted to ask you a question. Do you know which person from Ohio has killed the most people?
Bone collector, body snatcher, something like that from Cleveland. Who is it? What do we got?
Well, all of his stuff wasn't confirmed. I know that did just come out. He was coming up with ridiculous stories. But no, a guy by the name of Donald Harvey. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
He was the Angel of Death. That was his nickname.
Okay.
He was a nurse, and he was killing a bunch of patients. So he admitted to around 90 people that he killed.
Hey, that's something cool about Ohio. That's the state of Ohio. Let's talk about Akron, Ohio itself. It's a city that we were born and raised in. It's the city where this murder we're going to be talking about took place in. It's, as you mentioned, it's the fifth largest city in the state of Ohio. As of the 2020 census, Akron had a population of 190 plus thousand people. It was known as the rubber capital of the world. All right, so the Goodyear factories and headquarters were located here. Rubber was manufactured for the longest time, but I mean, I know their factories and headquarters are still here. I just think the production's died down quite a bit. More so moved overseas. Fun fact, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded here in Akron, Ohio. And Akron also contributed to Summit County being the meth capital of Ohio. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's something really to be proud of.
Early 2000s, Summit ranked third in the nation for registered meth sites. And on top of that, Jeffrey Dahmer, another notable murderer, was born and raised here in Akron, Ohio.
He was one of the 9.
We're gonna hang out. Gonna watch a movie. Gonna take some pictures.
You know, that's the bad side of Akron. It's not all bad here. Let's shed some light on some of the positive things that we got going on here in our home city. You mentioned this earlier. We have the Cuyahoga National Valley Park, and that's 32,000 acres. Beautiful scenery, great hiking. Definitely try to get up there every summer. Do you have like a favorite trail you like to take up there?
Oh man, we took that one this past summer. Was pretty damn cool. The overlook.
Mm-hmm.
We were climbing in caves.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
It's weird because Akron's definitely more of a, I'd say it's like a, I don't know if industrial is the right word, but it's a city. But then in the middle of it, it's just a huge national park. So if you're from here, you know exactly what it is. If you haven't been there, highly recommend it. As far as sports goes, no professional sports teams, but we do have the Akron Rubber Ducks. It's a minor league baseball team over in Canal Park. Always a good time. Akron Zips. Not too long ago, they won the national title for men's soccer. And we have the Soapbox Derby. Again, I've lived here my whole life. Never been to a Soapbox Derby race. Have you?
No, I don't really have the desire to.
We have the Firestone Country Club, which up until a few years ago, PJ would come here yearly for the tour. Tiger, Phil, a lot of solid golfers. Great food here in Akron. If you like hamburgers or pizzas, a lot of good options. My favorite is Luigi's.
I love Luigi's, but I think we are most famous for Swenson's. When people talk about Northeast Ohio, they have to mention Swenson's.
Don't forget about Skyway. It's a competitor. Pretty solid hamburgers as well. Not as good as Swenson's, though. Swenson's is definitely the best. And ice cream. Strickland soft serve. Can't beat it. That's just a few of our good things here in Akron, Ohio. So let's talk about the case of Hannah Hill. Hannah Hill was an 18-year-old girl from Akron, Ohio, who went missing in 1999. A week after her disappearance, sadly, she was found dead. Hannah was one of 6 murders in Akron that took place in 1999, which honestly, a relatively low number compared to the 36 in 2021. Among cities with over 100,000 in population, Akron, Ohio has the 4th highest homicide rate. This case dates back to May 19th of 1999. Hannah was a person who was looking forward to graduating high school. She was looking forward to starting her own chapter, getting out on her own, starting college. Really popular amongst her peers in school. She was nominated as the winter queen. You remember being 18, who enjoyed going out to parties and hanging out with those said friends.
Yeah, and actually, one of my cousins was kind of friends with her.
And not long before where this story starts, she recently just got a job. She bought a new car. Was really just on the path of independence. For those listening, we can all relate to turning 18, just looking forward to starting the next chapter of your life. At the time of where this story takes place, she did have a boyfriend, Brad, and unfortunately for Hannah and her family, Brad may not have been the greatest boyfriend at the time.
I wouldn't even say a good boyfriend at all.
We'll kind of talk about that more as we go on and kind of see why we may have that opinion. But, you know, naturally, when there is a murder, the first suspect is more than likely always going to be the spouse or a significant other of that said person. So Brad could potentially be someone who is considered a suspect.
As AJ mentioned, our case is going to start on the night of May 19th. Hannah came home. Plan was to just keep it chill, stay in. However, she was 18 years old, so it doesn't take much convincing to make plans later in the night, and that's exactly what happened. Hannah was heard leaving her house around 10:30 p.m. Unfortunately, that was the last time her parents would ever hear or see from her again. Hannah didn't return home that night, which isn't abnormal. As an 18-year-old, I was playing nights. I would crash at houses that I didn't know who it belonged to. The concern started the following day. She didn't come home.
Still not too weird, not come home in the morning. It's okay.
Yeah, but her mom discovered she didn't show up for work. If I did wake up at a random person's house, I would still show up for work.
Absolutely.
But she just got this job, just got the car, so it was extremely out of character for her.
As we were looking into this case, diving deeper into it, something that really jumped out to both of us was just, unfortunately, how poorly this case was handled from the very beginning all the way up until the end. Hannah's mom, knowing something was off, she reached out to the local police department May 20th, this is the very next day, to file a missing persons report. Essentially, the police took no immediate action whatsoever. Basically, it's reiterated, hey, she's 18, these things happen, it's not weird for an 18-year-old person to just kind of go out on their own for a couple days. Eventually, they'll turn up, they'll come back around. As you mentioned, Dakota, this was just out of character for Hannah. Friends and family were aware of that, so they kind of just took it upon themselves to start searching since the police department were not as concerned. Anytime that you reach out to the police for assistance and it's on the family and friends to pretty much take it from there, obviously we're off to a really rough start. We just continue to go downhill from there. A few days later, May 22nd, police received a phone call regarding an abandoned car that was located on Kane Road, which is in Akron, Ohio, 9 miles from Hannah's house.
And about 2 minutes from where we are right now.
Yeah, right down the road. You wouldn't think this is a big deal, an abandoned car. These things happen. Akron Police Department showed up, left a ticket on the car. However, this actually was a pretty big deal because that car that was reported abandoned was actually Hannah's car. If the police would have accepted the missing persons report, they would have known upon arriving on scene, this is actually a missing person's car. We should probably look into it a little bit further. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. They did not check it. She pretty much just got a parking ticket.
Now, some days had passed since that ticket by the APD, but they decided, let's take this a little more serious. So they notified the media to ask the public for help finding Hannah. And as soon as they did, they received a number of tips from the public that there was an abandoned car on Kane Road, as we mentioned. People called in, and the officers told them it was too late in the day to call back the next day, which is absolutely wild. We have a missing person case here. So the next day they finally sent someone out knowing whose car it was now. This was a full week after, so we're at May 26th now. They arrived to the scene and opened up the trunk, and this is where they found Hannah's body.
Yeah, so here we are a week later. Unfortunately, if they would have just accepted the missing persons report the day that her mom tried to file it, they would have went out to the car immediately the next day and realized whose car it was, and who knows how this could have played out differently. But nonetheless, here we are. She was found naked from the waist down, body covered in bruises, face full of contusions. Hannah had now been located, but given the lack of urgency from the start, Akron residents naturally were unhappy with how this had unfolded. The APD were now shifting their full focus, making this case their top priority to solve this murder. All hands on deck.
Yeah, they're like, oh, we fucked up.
So now that we have a body, it was time for the Akron Police Department to start looking for suspects. Most would think Brad, her boyfriend at the time, would be suspect number one, giving history of physical and mental abuse according to her friends. And also, at the time of her original disappearance, it was noted that Brad had scratch marks on his face. But all of that aside, Akron police moved past Brad fairly quickly, crossing him off their suspect list, as there was nothing that indicated him or indicated that he had any involvement. Further investigation led Akron Police Department into their next suspect, Denny Ross.
Now, Denny was a person that Hannah came in contact through her boyfriend, Brad, another thing that he did wrong. And checking her phone records, it showed that she called Denny before leaving her parents' house the night of the 19th. He was thought to be the last person to see her alive. Denny was not someone that she was close to. However, he had his own place. There were no parents, no supervision. He hosted a bunch of house parties where Hannah frequented. So it's understandable why Denny was next in line to be questioned by the police.
Now, Denny was someone that the police department was already pretty familiar with prior to Hannah's murder. February of 1999, he was arrested for possession of cocaine. And in fact, 2 days prior to Hannah's disappearance, he pled guilty for cocaine trafficking. But unfortunately, another bad break. Rather than jail time for trafficking, he was just sentenced to 2 years probation. Had he been sentenced to prison time, jail time, perhaps Hannah would still be here today. So let's go back to May 26th. This was the day that Hannah's body was discovered in her car. The same day, they went to Denny's apartment to question him in hopes of maybe getting some more information or some details regarding the murder. Now, when they opened up the door, Denny had a cast on his arm. Slight red flag. Nonetheless, he was also caught in a lie, as he had told friends that she was never there, but now he was telling detectives that she in fact did come over. Another red flag. Also concerning is, given that Hannah was at his apartment the night she was missing, Denny never reached out to detectives when they asked for more information. I think it's normal if you hear that they're looking for information and you were someone who saw that person that same day, you'd reach out and let them know that you saw that person. Withholding that information was deemed pretty suspicious to those investigating. The same night of the interview, they secured a search warrant for the inside of his apartment.
Now, I want to mention his apartment is somewhere where I passed probably thousands of times. Just figured out this past week.
Yeah.
What's that Therapy Ice Cream?
Mm-hmm.
So any of our listeners ever been to Therapy Ice Cream on Canton Road, right by 224? He lived in an apartment that's actually behind that. They share a parking lot. I never knew that until this past week.
So a search warrant is secured, and they're able to enter the premises of his apartment. Immediately upon entering, suspicions continue to increase due to what they found inside.
Now, what the detectives found inside, they noticed some blood on the walls, on the shades, on the bed sheets. In this documentary we were watching, when they're walking up the stairs for the search warrant, they heard a thud on the ground. When they went back out, they found a trash bag in the bushes outside the window, and in that trash bag contained a purse, pants, underwear, a shoe, all with blood on them. All that stuff belonged to Hannah.
In this case, where the local police department had been dragging their feet numerous times from the beginning, they were now moving at a much quicker pace. 48 hours after locating Hannah's body, Denny Ross had been arrested for the murder of Hannah. Now that an arrest had been made, the detectives began building a case to put Denny away. On the opposing side, Denny's father, Alan, was bound and determined to go to bat for his son, as he did not believe his son could commit such a heinous crime.
Now, later on, I want to circle back and mention some shady shit that his dad did.
So let's do a quick recap to review all of the evidence and red flags that we know about Denny thus far.
All right, so first of all, Hannah was at his apartment the night she went missing. Dane denied her being there and originally lied about it. And then when police were asking for assistance, he never came forward with information that could have been useful. The blood that was found all throughout the apartment, the trash bag with all of her belongings, and then lastly, there were bite marks found on her body that matched his dental records. Most would say this seemed to be an open-shut case.
I would agree with that. Seems pretty simple. But the reason that you pay good money for a defense team is because they are just really good at what they do. With the evidence not in their favor, they went to work, trying to prove doubt in these things that were presented and to try to sway this case in their favor. We recapped the original evidence and incriminating details, but let's just jump to the defense team's argument.
All right, so to begin, the defense claimed that the detectives rushed into judgment and they're just simply blaming the last person to be seen with her instead of really investigating all their options. The defense brought to light her boyfriend, all their troubles with the domestic disputes, the scratches they found on his face, and then they mentioned how they immediately moved on from him with no actual evidence that he wasn't involved. The defense stated that Denny lived adjacent to an adult bookstore / a porn shop that I completely forgot was there until this case, and then I realized there's a lot of shady characters in and out there. Could have been anybody, really.
A lot of weird people going to those places, for sure.
They claim that the trash bag found outside of his apartment was planted, that no one would be dumb enough to actually hold on to all of the evidence that could put him away. And actually, the trash bag that it was all found in matched none of the ones that were in Denny's apartment.
Interesting.
So why would he have just one random trash bag? And going back to the blood splatter, none of it could be traced back to Hannah, so this dude just has random ass blood everywhere.
Random blood.
Yeah, I don't even think it was his. This prevented prosecution from moving forward, proving that it actually took place inside the residence. Another major find, there was no evidence or DNA of Denny's that was found in her car or trunk, and also there were no hair fibers from Denny found on her body.
Yeah, so where we're at now, totally different feeling, different vibe. Defense was calling into question how someone with a broken arm, because you remember he had a cast, could carry a body down a flight of steps, placing a body in a trunk to not be seen by anybody, then to drive her car miles away to be no DNA or fibers in her car or on her body. It starts to get easier to see how they were setting this up on their end to more so question all of this. Basically, it was now both teams arguing the presence of circumstantial evidence versus the lack of concrete evidence. After just 8 days, the defense announced that they would not be calling any witnesses, which was a bold move, and that they would be resting their case. The defense team was confident enough that they were able to establish reasonable doubt. This jury was made up of 5 men and 7 women, and they were now called upon to decide if Denny Ross was innocent or guilty. As the story moves forward, you can't help but feel that whatever could go wrong would go wrong. And this continued to follow suit the day before the jury was to begin voting on their decision. During a break, one juror made mention to another juror that they did not know what all the fuss was about. Denny is clearly guilty because Brad passed the polygraph test. This may not seem like a major deal, not a crazy comment. However, it did turn out to be quite detrimental. Around the time after Hannah's body was located, Brad did in fact come forward willing to take a polygraph test in which he did pass. The problem is that this polygraph test was not mentioned during the trial or to the jury. The Akron Beacon-Journal, which was the local newspaper, did however publish a story about Brad taking this test and passing it. This test was public knowledge to the local citizens of Akron outside of court, but not to the jury inside. The issue is that the jurors involved in this case had been instructed by the judge specifically to ignore any and all news media regarding the trial. The juror who was informed of this information during break reported to the foreman of the jury to notify them of this issue. The next morning, the jury began voting on charges. However, during the voting, amongst the jury, the judge interrupted and asked all to stop what they were doing and to quit voting immediately. This is after the foreman passed along a note to the judge informing her of this violation regarding the news about the polygraph test. As the details regarding the test has never been made public to the jurors in court, the news of this being shared, it was thought that the jury could no longer deliberate without prejudice. So here's where things get very interesting. The judge approached the defense and the prosecution both. She met with Denny Ross and his defense team, and she had asked if they wanted to either continue with the case as is or if they would prefer a mistrial. Now, the defense felt so confident in their case that they just wanted to proceed, even if the tainted juror believed Ross to be guilty. They were thinking that the rest of the jury would find him to be not guilty.
And if they continued with the case and they were presented with a non-guilty verdict, he'd be innocent, and that would prevent him from double jeopardy in the future.
Exactly. While a mistrial would allow him to be innocent at the time, a mistrial would open the door for the prosecution team to move forward with a new case when ready and able to do so. Thus, this being one of the reasons Ross's team wanted to continue proceeding regardless. After considering all options regarding whether to proceed or declare a mistrial, the judge brought everyone in and ruled the case to be a mistrial.
Court finds that this jury cannot render a fair and impartial verdict in accordance with the law. Court therefore discharges the jury without prejudice to the prosecution. A mistrial is declared.
While this was extremely unfortunate, a blow to Hannah Hill's family, who was in desperate need of some justice, thankfully, as mentioned, this did leave the door open for a retrial in the potential future.
So now, Danny was a free man due to that mistrial, but this may have been the best case scenario. It's believed that the jury was actually going to vote that he was innocent. So now we're going to fast forward 10 years. The state appealed and started a retrial against them for the murder of Hannah. So we're going to pick up in 2012.
After 10 years of waiting, this allowed the prosecution to prepare a much stronger case this time. There was DNA discovered under Hannah's fingernails that was able to link back to Denny. Denny's DNA was able to be found on Hannah's shirt that we found in the trash bag, as well as the underwear. There was blood that was consistent to his DNA profile. Sadly, it makes you wonder why it took 10 years to hammer down this evidence, rather than having it prepared at the time of the original trial. Regardless, prosecution now had a much more concrete case as opposed to the substantial evidence that they had presented 10 years prior. In the 10 years that passed, the prosecution team was able to much better present Denny Ross's character to a jury, reflecting what kind of person this guy really was. It had been discovered in interviewing of ex-girlfriends that Denny liked to strangle women during intercourse. Heather Hamrick testified against Denny, stating that he would like to choke her to a point where she would have bruises and would threaten to kill her while choking. Julie Kane was also called to testify and reiterated the same line of claims regarding choking and how she was reluctant to engage. Prosecution was able to bring to light that Hannah was thought to be murdered by strangulation, reflecting Denny's obsession of choking women.
In this retrial, we had some pretty interesting witness statements, and I wanted to circle back. Earlier I mentioned Denny's father may have knew about it. So one of the witness statements, it came from a guy named Michael Riley. He was one of Denny's friends. He said that a couple days, I think after the murder, Denny called Michael to come help him clean up his house. So he paid him $25 and a bunch of beer to do a deep clean of his apartment. And that same person claims that over the years, Denny's father would just randomly give him money because he never came forward until the retrial. So in those 10 years, he knew about the cleaning of the apartment, never said anything. So I think it's a little strange that this guy's just randomly getting money from Denny's father over the year.
Oh, definitely a little suspicious. So in the 10 years that passed, the defense team, they continued to remain adamant that Ross was innocent. Their plan of attack this time around was more so continue to point the finger at Hannah's boyfriend, Brad. They had been persistent that he was abusive, controlling, and that he was in fact the one that murdered Hannah. Their claim was that Brad discovered Hannah and Denny involved in a romantically related relationship, and due to jealousy, he killed Hannah and then framed Denny with the trash bag full of evidence.
So here's why that won't work, because we have another witness that came in, another person that never spoke up before but now is speaking up. She claims to have seen Denny throw the bag out of the window, and also that night he raped her. Oof. This was a 17-year-old girl, so she's an underage girl. She was scared to come forward. She comes forward after all these years. And she was at his house when Hannah's body was found. She heard him in the other room talking to someone, some along the lines of he did it or something. So this is another key witness that is coming forward after all these years.
Thankfully for Hannah and her family, 10 years later, during this retrial, given all the new evidence that we had just mentioned, justice was finally served and Denny Ross was found guilty of the murder, along with several other charges in relation to the Hannah Hill case. Denny was sentenced to 19 years to life. While it may not relate to Hannah's case specifically, it's important to make note that while the jury was not made aware of this, during the trial, Denny had actually already been convicted of another crime. While out on bail for the Hill case, Denny Ross had raped and attempted to kill a 32-year-old Jennifer Tittle. Jennifer survived this encounter with Denny. However, she suffered nerve damage to her neck as well as a broken jaw, which had to be wired for a total of 6 months. Denny was found guilty for the rape of Jennifer and was sentenced to 25 years in prison for that. While it's important to emphasize justice was eventually served, it's hard to ignore the number of times that Hannah and this case were done wrong. Perhaps if the APD filed the missing persons report at the time her mother attempted to do so, the officer who showed up to her car to issue a parking ticket would have checked the car in its entirety, perhaps leading to a different outcome.
And I just want to know what the hell happened to that parking ticket.
That's a great question. I wonder if it was ever paid, if they withdrew it. I'd have to imagine they did not hold anyone accountable for that ticket.
Oh, God, I would hope not.
If prosecution had brought the evidence we mentioned during the retrial to the original trial, he would have been locked up sooner. This could have prevented the rape that took place against Jennifer. And to add to the heartbreak for the Hill family, Hannah's brother Justin took his own life after the second trial of his sister's murder. It's hard to say that the trial and retrial did not possibly affect his mental health, resulting in the decision that he made.
Yeah, he really served as the family spokesperson over the retrial, and it had to take a toll on him. Keep getting in front of these cameras, reliving the strategy over and over. Coming into this, you never heard of this case, right?
Correct.
And most of the people I talked to, all from Akron, never heard of it. Now, my family is big into true crime, and I brought this up. Every single one of them remembered, even the small details. My dad isn't into true crime, really. He watches the shows, but
sure. My
mom's the one that watched all these documentaries and stuff. He knew all the evidence. Like, he was telling me stuff that I didn't even know. So that goes to show that it really did rock our city. And Hannah was my sibling's age at the time, so it's something I'll never forget. And now, every time we drive past these two places where her car was found on Kane Road and Denny's apartment, we're always going to remember this case.
So as we conclude our first episode of 50 States, 50 Murders, once more we wanted to thank you, the listener, for tuning in and giving us a chance. We hope that you'll be sure to tune in next week as we travel to our next state in the 50 States, 50 Murders series.